The prayer seemed right at the moment. Please, Lord, give me faith. It had come from the least expected voice in the room. Her name was Jill. No Jill that you know. This is a story I'm reading from someone else. This 30-something, single, successful businesswoman was the youngest and least religious daughter of the woman who was in the coma, around whose bed we were standing. Her mother, her mentor, her rock, was lying victim of her own genetics, dying gently of a burst blood vessel deep within her brain. Her mother's intellect and feelings were already in God's hands. Only her brainstem, her strong heart, and a respirator-driven lungs were keeping her alive, but this was only a temporary solution. Absent a miracle, the machinery would be disconnected the next day. We circled the bed of her mother, joined hands with each other, the patient, the beloved, both of God and us. We struggled in prayer. It was in the midst of those prayers offered around the circle that the timid voice of a normally confident Jill rose like a bloom in the desert. Please, Lord, she implored, give me faith. Now, it wouldn't have seemed so out of place given the fact that Jill had hardly graced the doors of the church by her own admission since she had moved away some years ago, except that she had done very well for herself, and now she didn't have much time for things spiritual, certainly no time for the church, and very little time for God. No time until this crisis hit, and she seemed lost and alone, even among family and friends. Her prayer was so quiet, so desperate, so genuine, so yearning, so longing for some power not her own to fill her in that moment. Please, she pleaded. In our readings today, we share prayers like that. In Habakkuk, he asks God to help while society comes unhinged around him. Justice, like a hollow reed pushed around in the wind. Paul reminds Timothy to rekindle the gift, faith that's in him, given to him by his mother and grandmother. The disciples following Jesus, following his teaching that included things like giving it all up and forgiving over and over and over those who have wronged you, they finally come to the conclusion, and it is no mystery to us why they make this conclusion, Lord, increase our faith. How much faith do you need? How much faith is enough? They feel inadequate to the tasks around them, insufficient to the challenges that Jesus has laid out for them, unable to imagine accomplishing anything that he is asking for. And after a week, like the one we've just had, or most weeks, shootings, stabbings, injustice, hacking, increased bombings of Aleppo, the falling away of a peace agreement, train derailments, and more, I suspect more than just a few of us feel pretty similar. Like we need more faith just to get through, let alone enough faith to make a difference. And we too stand like Jill at the edge of something, in her case a bedside, or maybe it's a conference table, or maybe it's watching the evening news, and we stammer with Jill and with the disciples, please, Lord, increase our faith. And then something really unusual happens. You think this would be that teachable prime moment where the disciples see their need, recognize their need, and ask Jesus for help, for more faith. And you would think that Jesus would both welcome and grant their request. You think it would be the prime teachable moment. Which among you, having a teenager, would not want such a moment where they recognized and asked for help? But Jesus doesn't grant their request. Did you hear what he said? I think most of us, because we have that judgmental committee inside of our heads, hear Jesus rebuke the disciples. Did you hear it as a rebuke? To their request, Jesus says, if you have even a speck of faith, and we hear the implications is that they actually don't even have a speck of faith. I mean, I know more than a few of us, including myself, who from time to time can jump to the wrong conclusion. Anybody ever get into one of those? Jump to the wrong conclusion and realize you're off from shore when you should have stayed with your feet planted in a different conclusion? What if Jesus wasn't rebuking? What if Jesus was being sincere and truthful when he responds? In fact, maybe Jesus is saying that their request is the problem. It's not the amount of their faith, as we would assume. We are Americans. Bigger is always better, right? More is better than less. Maybe his pushback is against the question of the amount of faith. Maybe such a retort is what we need to hear as well in a world hell-bent on negativity and more of it, to remind and to reorient us to the miraculous presence of God that is around us every single moment, and the totally sufficient faith that we and they already have. It doesn't look like much, but this wee little faith can pack a powerful punch. Faith, even small and everyday variety faith, is a faith that gets it done and gets us through. Look at the images Jesus uses: a mustard seed and a slave. That's kind of the point, getting it done, of the servant portion of the parable that Jesus tells today. Servants are not invited to the dinner table to eat first. That is not how it works, their culture or ours. Servants do what they have to do until their work is completely done. They don't get great thanks simply for doing their job. They just do it. On Fridays, when you leave the office, does your boss give you high fives on the way out of the office? Great job today. Anybody? Nobody? Don't go to the office? You're the boss? No. Even in our everyday life, we know we don't get that kind of affirmation. We do our job, and maybe what we get is a paycheck for doing a job that works. That's kind of what Jesus is driving at. Faith is not some kind of thing that we have to make an objective other. Faith is not some kind of precious commodity that we have to work at and scrimp and save to afford. It's not something we work to save or increase or invest so that we can add to it. Faith doesn't always show up in the most heroic and most overhanded sorts of ways, but in simply doing what needs to be done, big or small, great or mundane, just because it needs doing. Do you see how faith works? Sometimes we look way beyond where faith is actually happening. We want to see the big thing. We want to see the parting of the Red Sea, and yet faith is present in everyday moments all around us. Did you see it this week? In New Jersey, after the train crash, there was a guy interviewed on the news. He had this thick Jersey accent. Hardly could understand him. But he was talking with particularly lacking of fanfare as to how he kicked the window out of the train, like he does it every day. And the guy next to him was a lot more excited and a lot less Jersey accent. He said, yeah. And then this guy and I, we moved the window out of the way, and then all the passengers backed up. Instead of rushing the window to get out and trampling each other on the way, they all backed up, and we let the people that were hurt most get out of the train first. Do you hear it? You hear the faith? You hear it? Can you catch it? Are you there? You awake? It was a small act. Unforgettable, probably to most. But I have to tell you that this 53-year-old gnarly mulberry tree was moved. Or faith is something like 15 ordinary, wonderful, gorgeous folks from New Hope showing up on a Saturday morning for a walk to end poverty sponsored by Lutheran Social Services. It wasn't heroic. It was 1 mile. I was expecting 3 to 5. I'm ready. I'm stretched out 1 mile. One mile. But it wasn't heroic, but it was something. Maybe something God can use. Maybe faith like what God called mustard seed. Jesus lifts this sort of thing up as faith in the Gospel of Luke. Jesus called it faith when a desperate woman in need of healing came up behind him to touch the fringe of his garment because she was confident that if she just brushed him, that there was enough there that would make her well. And he turned and said, faith. He called it faith when he saw the centurion, the Roman centurion, who said, oh, Jesus, you don't have to come to my house. I know what it's like to be under authority, and so you just say the word. You just say the word, I know my slave will be healed. Jesus said that's not faith like that in all of Israel. And this was a Roman centurion. And it was faith when the woman demonstrated her gratitude in extravagant ways because she had been forgiven. And he will call it faith when the Samaritan leper of the 10 will come back and give thanks for his healing. Faith. So should we really be surprised that Jesus challenges the disciples' idea that faith must be sizable to be meaningful? Faith is as simple as a servant performing his duties, Jesus said. Faith cannot be quantified. Any measure, even the smallest of measures, can be impactful, meaningful, and profound. Maybe this is our misunderstanding too. How many of us have asked for more faith? It's kind of like pregnancy, you know? You're just a little pregnant, or if you're pregnant, you're all the way. I imagine Jesus in the midst of our prayers having a conversation within the Godhead of the Trinity when someone says, "Give me faith," and Jesus turns to the Spirit and said, "Did we not give him faith already? Give me more." You got the allotted amount. It's either pregnant or not pregnant. It's faith or not faith. It's not an amount that matters, and yet it's a very human thing to want more, isn't it? To need more. We sometimes get the misconception that an act of faith seems to be something significant, something costly, something extraordinary to merit God's kind of attention. But that does not seem to be what Jesus is saying. He said even the smallest amount of faith, like a mustard seed, can be profound. This misperception isn't new. Martin Luther, 500 years ago, writing, extolling the virtue of a father changing diapers. How things change, how they stay the same, huh? Martin Luther, emphasizing the father, because apparently it was extremely rare and probably considered unbecoming of fathers at the time. So Luther writes this: when a father goes ahead and washes diapers or performs some other menial task for his child, and someone ridicules him as being an effeminate fool, God still, with all his angels, smiles on him. Nothing profound there, is there? Unless you're tired of washing diapers. Then it's truly profound. So I imagine Jesus calls faith many unnoticed things that are in our lives that you and I do every week. We show up for work. We do a good job. We listen to someone who needs to talk. We get the kids off for school. Sitting with someone in the cafeteria who looks like they need a friend. Volunteering at the Caneo Meals program. Voting, even if the field of candidates seems kind of discouraging. Balancing the books of a local community group. Writing a thank you note to someone who has done some kindness to us. The list could go on and on. None of these things are particularly big deals, are they? And yet, it is just these kind of acts that occupy so much of our time, and they are the things that need to just be done, you know? And that's just the kind of person that we are, to do them. The kind of person that God made us to be, who faith shaped us to be. I suspect also that most of the time, these acts are so mundane that you never write them in your diary or in your journal or put them in your calendar because they are just that simple and routine. But sometimes we get a moment where we awaken in the midst of the slumber of the mundane things that we do in our lives, and we become aware in that moment that God is in these things. And we can realize that acts of faith are all around us, and that such faith fills us, small bits at a time, small at first, kind of like an invasive weed that we know a lot about, that paints these massive hillsides behind us yellow for hundreds and hundreds of miles. It's nice when the Bible's weeds are the same weeds that we have today. Mustard. Faith, Jesus said, is like mustard seed. Seems so little and insignificant, but it packs a powerful punch. Mustard seed, if you went across the street and grabbed up a hunk of soil, you know what would be in it? Mustard seed. It's always within reach. Faith, your faith. It's always enough. And given its size, it has a shocking potency. Now, I know when we read the headlines, when we watch the news, and there's more shootings, and there's more injustice, and there's more war, and there's more division, it can seem like there is no hope, because these things sedate us. They turn our eyes toward big things and our eyes away from the small ways in which God gets our attention. Yet all around us are signs of hope. God's continuing love and care for a world, though they abound in small, ordinary, mundane acts of faithfulness, you have enough faith, even if it feels like, oh, it's nothing, or it's just a small thing, or we only did what we could kind of faith. It's still faith and does what needs to be done. It does small acts, often with great kind of love, and such faith makes a difference. Jill, standing by the bedside of her dying mother, praying for more faith, is what every one of us does when we're facing unseeable futures and steep difficulties. But she's invited to see what else is happening in that room. Standing with Jill, hand in hand, side by side, are a million acts of small faith. She's there with her mother in one hand. She's holding her mother's hand, whom she's already beginning to grieve. And this woman planted faith in the lives of her daughters. Her sisters are there, in whom is embedded the image of her mother, etched in every face, in every laugh, and in every maddening mannerism. She's there. Across her mother are a couple of shawls that were knit by women from her church. Her mother's prayer shawl, one of her sister's prayer shawls, and Jill's prayer shawl are all present on the bed with those women standing behind it. Eventually, Jill will go home. She'll go back to her mother's house and find there food waiting from the ladies' aid. And the neighbor kid mowed the grass. Now, he was forced to mow the grass, if the truth is told, because his mother told him to and said, "You don't know what it's like to lose a mother, how terrible it is to lose a mother." And yet this adolescent, as he looked at his mother, understood. And so he mowed the grass. The grass is mown. And as she looks around this circle, she's hand in hand on the other side with her pastor, who will speak words of comfort and words of promise to her mother and to her and her sisters. And she holds the hand of people in the circle who will fix tea sandwiches for the reception at her mother's funeral, and who will call her and take her out to coffee, and who will grieve with her, her mother's friends, who already are and in some ways will become like second mothers to her. That's the kind of thing the church does, isn't it? The servant church. Ah, it's nothing, we say. It's just a small thing, we add. Don't make too much of it, we say, because we're Norwegian. We only did that, we only did what we could do, others say. I mean, we're on the reception committee anyway, but we love your mom, they add. And we loved watching her joy as you grew into the woman that you are today. And a soul that was parched and afraid and standing in the dark, begging for God to give her faith at a bedside, begins to feel the warmth of many small acts, begins to see the evidence of love's continuance even after death. And that soul blossoms with something like yellow mustard blooms. And you could swear that those pains so deeply rooted like a mulberry tree and those mountainous heartaches, you could just swear they moved. Such is the nature of faith.